The Scottish National Party is now said to be all out of ideas. Alex Massey writing in the Times this morning that it was a rather bizarre mixture of Taggart and what he's calling CSI Uddingston. Uddingston being a suburb of Glasgow where Nicola Sturgeon and Peter Murrell shared a home, which was being searched, I think, up until quite late last night. I think they might have finished that now, but let's find out from Alex Salmond precisely what he knows and what's going on. Alex, a very good morning to you. Welcome.
Good morning. Happy Good Friday. Mate.
Yes. Well, it is a nice Easter, isn't it? It brings together the terms that we all think of as the crucifixion and the resurrection all in one go. We don't know quite yet who's been crucified, and we don't yet know who's going to be resurrected on Sunday, but it's got a certain biblical feel to it, all this, hasn't it?
Well, it certainly has, including the exodus or the attempted exodus at Dover. I mean, I loved your remark about England being a country you can get in without a passport, but you can't get out with one.
It's true. I know.
Small consolation to these poor folk at Dover waiting multiple hours to get on their Easter break.
Yes.
But yes, you have to see the irony in all this.
I mean, there really is. There's so much of it going on that I mean, people have said that the irony and sort of sarcasm and parody is all now dead because you literally couldn't make it up. And in fact, on April Fool's Day, I saw that up in Scotland, people were saying, well, the sort of stuff that's actually going on here is so bizarre that you can't put April Fool's stories in the paper anymore because they're not as good as the real ones.
Right.
But listen, I heard you talking last week when you had your own show here on TalkTV about the whole idea of Alba and the whole idea of independence, and people are saying that independence is now a sort of a long-forgotten dream. According to Alex Massey, and I know you'll correct me on this, YouGov say that in 10 years' time, would this country be independent? Only 30% foresaw that. 52% thought the constitutional status quo is more likely. And even on a 50-year timescale, only 45% of respondents thought independence more likely than not.
Yeah, but you would expect, London-centric journalists like Alex Massey. I mean, poor Alec, you know, if the SNP or independents were to die, what on earth would he have to write about? I mean, even in vested interest terms, Alex Massey should be desperately trying to keep the independence flame burning. The point I was making, and I think even Alec makes it himself in that column, is that we're seeing a development, a really interesting development. We're seeing many interesting developments, but we're seeing politically an interesting development where the last 5 opinion polls have shown the SNP support basically struggling, moving down towards where the Labour Party is. But support for independence is very, very high indeed. I mean, it's 47% on average in the last 5 polls. And so, I mean, for example, I did a public meeting, because, you know, we do public meetings.
Nicola Sturgeon does dodge one, isn't she?
Well, we did a public meeting in the Eagle Inn at Cope Bridge last night, which was stowed to the gunnels. Excellent. I mean, it was overflowing. There was overflow rooms about independence. But incidentally, Mike, they all asked to be fondly remembered to you from your day editing the Mirror.
Well, I've got many friends in the Shire, as it's known.
You put the Mirror to bed and then you go for a half and a half in Eagle Inn and Cope Bridge. I heard all about it last night. There's enthusiasm for independence, even as the SNP goes through its trials and tribulations.
So is it now time then to separate the SNP from independence, which would be rather... I mean, everyone's saying this is playing into your hands and that you're the man now who could take it forward, because let's face it, the questions that are now being asked, and we can't go into the ins and outs of what the police are doing and what they're looking at and what they've found, but what we can say is that many people, including Alex Neil, have said that surely the leadership now of the SNP is in question, because had all of this happened before Humza Yousaf was anointed the leader, he probably wouldn't be the leader.
Yeah, well, let's address both of these points. I mean, not just myself, but I've been a number of other people and organisations apart from the Alpha Party who now have a very important role to play in bringing the independence movement together, out with the terms of the Scottish Green government. An independence convention, where obviously the SNP would participate, would be the dominant force, but would include the other parties and the other organisations and the think tanks, and let the business of progressing the independence campaign be run by the independence convention, and let the SNP government get back to the rather important business of running Scotland competently and efficiently. That would be a good way to go. Secondly, you ask about, a number of supporters of Kate Forbes are in the papers today saying, look, there should be a rerun of the leadership test. And of course, they've got a very strong argument. And the argument is precisely because the SNP executive, advised by one Peter Murrell, accelerated the timescale for the leadership election beyond what it usually is. And I mean, people like Alec Neil and Kate Forbes, for all I know, are entitled to the suspicion that it was all rushed through before the deluge, before the roof fell.
Well, indeed. And I mean, poor old Humza Yousaf has inherited the good old poisoned chalice, hasn't he? Because, you know, no sooner is he installed as leader that the police are all over the SNP headquarters running around, you know, digging around underneath the chairs. And then he says that anyone who suggests that the police and the SNP were somehow in cahoots, in his words, is a conspiracy theory. Well, I'm sorry to tell him, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's a perfectly logically held belief.
Yes, and of course held by a large number of people in the SNP. Perhaps most of the 48% who voted for Kate Forbes and Ash Regan are the two candidates. But you know, I mean, I don't envy Humza the task he now has in hand. But I think last time I was on your show, I gave him some advice, totally unsolicited and unwanted, and certainly didn't act upon it. I said, well, now you're in. For goodness sake, get the drawbridge down, make a clear demarcation between your leadership and what has gone on before, reunite the party, get Kate Forbes and Ash Regan into your cabinet, unite the party and make sure everybody knows you're not the continuity candidate. Now, unfortunately, Humza last week, and it's only last week the poor man was installed, shows the opposite. He's formed a cabinet of his chums, to use the phrase that John Major once unfortunately used, or maybe it was David Mellor used about John Major. That didn't turn out well.
No.
A cabinet of chums doesn't turn out well. It doesn't unite the party. And instead of, you know, well, I'm in the northeast of Scotland this now, Mike. What we'd say is what's required is to muck out the buyer. Right. Instead of cleaning stables, cleaning house, he sort of we're going to have a look at transparency in the SNP at some time, somewhere, somewhen. I mean, total nonsense. I mean, he had the opportunity, and I know it's difficult when you come in as leader because all sorts of things are happening. There's issues on your desk. You feel you've got to run around the country in a frantic manner, trying to establish your presence, all that stuff. The most important thing for him to do last week was to get that clear demarcation line from what has been and what would happen under his leadership and unite his party. Unfortunately, he did neither of them.
Yes. Well, it might be nice as well if he was to make some kind of statement as to the policy decisions he's likely to take and the direction he wants to take the party. And I've heard nothing on that front either. But maybe it's not helped by the media in Scotland, of which I used to be a rather irritant part. I'm just looking at the BBC.
Remember, you were, Mike, revered by your colleagues and even your opponents.
I'm not about sure revered, but they certainly didn't like me very much. But listen, the Scotland page of the BBC website I'm looking at, the top story is tick germ risk should be mapped, according to a GP. They're talking about Lyme disease, which of course is quite an important story, but you would think in the midst of what is probably the biggest political crisis that has ever faced, you know, a devolved Scotland, that they might have a couple of stories about what's going on.
Well, you know, I'm afraid that the BBC and inquisitive journalism or even balanced journalism are strangers these days. And I mean, they always claim that, you know, it's lack of resources, that they don't have the people available to go about finding the stories. And with a few honourable exceptions, and we both know there are honourable exceptions to this, some of the investigative teams, you know, they don't, all they do is regurgitate the press releases and often fawn to the politicians instead of doing things properly. Lyme disease is a big issue, Mike, incidentally. And it's something that deserves investigation and deserves to be properly addressed. But perhaps it wouldn't be the lead story today.
Right. You would think.
And maybe not tomorrow either.
I mean, here's an opportunity for Humza Yousaf to do something. Not that you and I should be in any way helping this guy to make a name for himself.
Last time.
Well, listen, the Labour Party poster, I don't know if you've seen this today, the Labour Party have put out a tweet which went out last night, which I think is one of the most disgraceful things I've ever seen, and we've been around a long time, you and I. Picture of Rishi Sunak, and the words say, do you think adults convicted of sexually assaulting children should go to prison? Rishi Sunak doesn't. And they've got a signature of Rishi Sunak underneath. And it's very clear what they're trying to do. It's very clear what they're trying to say. John McDonnell has said it's not what the Labour Party should stand for. I think it's a disgrace. What do you reckon?
I agree with John McDonnell. And I mean, show the Labour Party a belt and they'll hit below it, or at least try to. And the Tory Party aren't any better, as we're well aware, Mike. Listen, all I'd say to the SNP, the Labour Party, the Tory Party, the one dominant issue that people want to hear about is cost of living. And not just cost of living and saying, oh dear, we'll give you a few £100 to help with your spiralling electricity bills. I mean, cost of living as it's really affecting real people, but interest rates totally out of control, wrecking families, wrecking family finances, wrecking small businesses. And nobody seems to want to talk about that, as if there's no alternative to continue to hike interest rates and wipe people out of business. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's totally and utterly ridiculous. I mean, political parties, but who was it? Was it Clinton's campaign? Or it's the economy stupid. Right, quite apart from the bad taste of that advert, somebody should get into Labour HQ and indeed into Downing Street and look at them and say, look, it's the economy stupid. Bring forward your ideas to stop wrecking family finances and wrecking small businesses. That's what matters. That's the issue in which politicians should be judged, and give up the rest of the stuff. I mean, it's. I mean, whoever. I mean, I saw one of the shadow ministers. I don't recall her name, unfortunately, but she was trying to defend it. And what she said, the first word she said was, "Of course, I didn't draw up this advert."
Right.
And then she wanted to defend it. I mean, the clue is in the first words.
Yeah.
It is indefensible.
Yes, and they should take it down. They probably will, but like everything to do with Keir Starmer, it takes him at least 24 hours to 48 hours to flip-flop on any position. We expect him to do it probably by the time the resurrection happens, around about sort of Sunday afternoon.
Well, Keir Starmer's the great hope of the independence movement this time. I mean, he's announced sensing opportunity. He's going to come up to Scotland on a weekly basis. Nothing could reinforce the case for independence more than the appearance of Sir Keir on a weekly basis.
Well, there's a never-ending stream of the delusion from Westminster, isn't there? They always think, and we used to have the same problem in Scotland. I don't wish to pour scorn on my colleagues in London when I was in Scotland, but they always seem to think that, oh, things will get better if I come up there and help you out. And you go, actually, no, we don't want you up here. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know the difference between the M8 and the M9. You know, just stay down there and get the tube somewhere.
Well, they almost won the referendum campaign for me back in 2014. If you remember, the whole phalanx of Labour and MPs from London came up to campaign with the Tories against a yes vote for independence. The three leaders suspended Prime Minister's questions, the three amigos, and came up to Scotland in separate jets. Not very environmental, that.
No.
To campaign against independence. And one guy who was on a kind of tricycle made a fools of the lot of them by playing the Imperial Masters tune from Star Wars. All people saw was this phalanx of London politicians with the theme from the Imperial Masters, Star Wars, the background. Darth Vader would have done better for the no campaign than that bunch.
Exactly right. I mean, the Death Star and all that. But finally, let me ask you a question. I mean, you, I asked you this last time we spoke. You and Nicola were very close at one time. She was your protégée. She took over the SNP when you took a step back. What would you advise her to do if you were able to? And what would you advise Humza Yousaf to do? Should he rerun the election, do you think?
Well, I was asked, a million times this week, are you feeling happy or vindicated? And of course, I'd be less than human if there wasn't a wee bit of me said, what goes round comes around. But my overwhelming feeling is sadness because, I spent 45 years on the SNP.
Yeah.
I spent 20 years as leader. I mean, me and others, many others, built it up from nothing to be the dominant party of Scotland. And, whether people liked us or loathed us, whether they thought we were the best thing since sliced bread or the worst thing imaginable, whether we were rubbish or not, that most people reckoned that the SNP were a decent party and were pursuing a noble idea.
Yeah.
Whatever they thought about us.
Yeah, definitely.
That trashed over the last wee while is, the overwhelming feeling I've got is one of sadness. Now, what I suggest to Humza Yousaf is to recognise that. Recognise the problem of being the continuity candidate. For goodness sake, get a drawbridge between what you're doing and what has happened in the past, change direction, ditch the Greens, invite your opponents in the SNP into key positions in your cabinet, get your party back together, and above all, have the humility to extend the hand of friendship to the rest of the independence movement. If he's prepared to do that, he might be surprised by the generosity of the response.
Indeed. Well, have a lovely Easter weekend, Alex. Thanks very much for talking to us. Alex Salmond, former First Minister of Scotland, leader of the Alba Party, with some wise words there for Humza Yousaf, the new First Minister of Scotland, the new leader of the SNP, which has been described this morning in the Times as right out of ideas. I think they are. They might be right out of luck too.